Thank you. I want to thank the Permanent Observer Mission for this invitation. Thank you, Archbishop. And thank you for coming. It's very generous of you to give your time to an event like this. Despite the Universal Declaration of Human Rights' affirmation of the right to life quite clearly, and the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, these rights, and especially the right to life, have been ignored or even fervently contested in many nations since 1948, particularly in respect to the lives of our unborn brothers and sisters. This is a tragic irony given particularly increasing global awareness of the urgency of human rights, especially the rights of women and children. The theme of my remarks today will be that it's impossible that such a shock to the canon and hierarchy of human rights, represented by a claim of any right to destroy human life before birth, it's impossible that this would have only discrete consequences. There will be broad consequences, rather. This claim affects many other arguments about human rights and corresponding human duties. It tends, for example, to deny the existence of social obligations to vulnerable human beings generally. It suggests that human life is an individual versus a relational enterprise. In one of its great ironies, it tends to suggest that the matter of children, childbearing, child care, is really a women's problem. And it often insists that the medical community can be enlisted really indifferently as between healing or killing. So in what follows, I'm going to describe some of the broad consequences of the logic of abortion that really we can simply observe after decades of experience with its legality, but I also will be talking about some reasons for hope. So, not surprisingly, a first consequence of the legality of abortion, or the claim that it's a human right, has been the growth in its practice. In my own country, the United States, for example, it's conservatively estimated that the number of abortions doubled or tripled between the period immediately preceding the announcement by our Supreme Court of a right to abortion and the period that followed. Worldwide today, and again, it's difficult to get excellent figures, but it's estimated that there's at least 56 million abortions annually. Secondly, again, and obviously, a surprisingly large and increasing number of women are negatively affected. According to well-regarded international literature, abortion can easily compromise women's future healthy childbearing. And meta-analyses, such as those published in some of the British medical journals, indicate very widespread, moderate to even severe psychological consequences. There's spiritual consequences as well. The Catholic Church has a ministry called Project Rachel, and it is hard to express to you how weekly we are overwhelmed with the number of women of all faiths, or of no particular faith, who request assistance to ameliorate their spiritual wounds, some of which are weeks old, some of which are decades old. We have women come to us in their 70s and 80s who speak of an abortion many decades ago. I witnessed these psychological and spiritual effects firsthand during a year when I was working for the U.S. bishops. They asked me to spend considerable time with post-aborted women. And so every few days I spent several hours with women who'd had abortions in preparation for a national campaign to reach out to them to see if they required assistance. Even those who had at first expressed relief about their abortion told me of the profound damage abortion caused to their relationships with men, their relationships with their born children, and their overall sense of happiness and freedom. Again, ironically, given that abortion is promoted in the U.S. and elsewhere as a women's right, these women go regularly uncounted. They're ignored, they are marginalized by leading medical and abortion advocacy groups. I was on the ethics council of our leading national medical institute. I was on the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development Council. And I couldn't even persuade them to ask one question on their broad national survey about women's medical health, regarding women's experience of abortion. Just one question, but they didn't even want to know, and they didn't put the question on the national survey. Politically and culturally, legal abortion has become, in the minds of many, a proxy for progress for women. And this is so, again, ironic, because despite this persists despite opposition from a majority, or at the very least, a large plurality of women, depending on the country. Yet abortion advocacy instead obscures or absorbs energy from other efforts to achieve what women say in survey after survey they most want and need from their governments and from societies. Fair, educational, economic, employment, credit, and other civil rights, and laws and policies facilitating women's ability to do justice both to their families and to their work responsibilities outside the home. In other words, advocacy for the relatively inexpensive policy of legal abortion takes attention and resources away from more comprehensive, usually more expensive and more long-term policies that women actually say they favor in empirical surveys. Stressing the good of childlessness and women's absolute autonomy, abortion leads to the neglect or even denial of a social compact in favor of women, children, and families. Happily, women around the world, and for over half a century, have risen up to lead a variety of movements to end abortion, including massive efforts to help women and girls caught in a crisis pregnancy. Pro-life women, many of whom are Catholic or Christian and in other faiths, have founded and staffed thousands of centers assisting women before, during, and after the birth of their children. I've led a woman-to-woman pro-life effort in the United States, and I can personally testify to women's frustration that the cause of legal abortion is carried out in their name. In 2012, I offered a public letter rebutting a United States law insisting that the high point of women's freedom included avoiding childbearing, including in part by resort to abortion, and forcing even religious institutions to provide some drugs and devices with abortifacient effects free to their employees. In a brief period and with absolutely no paid advertising, over a matter of just a couple of weeks, I attracted 77,000 women's signatures. So I began to offer these women online peer-reviewed expert literature, sociological, economic, medical, etc., to make their voices heard in a media culture dramatically biased against pro-life women. The number of women who continue to respond to my offers over 6 years really revealed the size of the silent majority of women who desire governmental policies holistically supporting their ability to have and rear children, their ability to work outside the home while parenting, and the rights of all children to a dignified life. A third consequence of the movement for legal abortion is the disproportionate suffering of the poor. In so many countries where abortion is legal, poor women suffer from abortion vastly more than their economically privileged sisters. This occurs simultaneous with and the long-running state programs that supply free contraception directly to the poor, as much as you can imagine. And this is all the more tragic, given that studies show in the US and elsewhere that poor women are dramatically more opposed to abortion than women with more privileges. A fourth consequence of the push for legal abortion is harms to the relations between men and women. As documented by a wide variety of scholars, and really most of these scholars are not what one would call pro-life at all, when sexual relationships are separated emotionally and physically from tomorrow, from their link to children, to kin, to family, and frankly even separated from the idea of love, sex becomes unbearably light and liquid. It loses its meaning. It becomes transactional. Sexually transmitted diseases skyrocket. Vastly increased numbers of women find themselves rearing children without the help of the fathers. Temporary uncommitted relationships proliferate, and marriage and parenting begin to retreat, and again, all dramatically more to the poor than to the economically privileged. A final consequence of the legal cause of abortion: rights of conscience, belief, and religion become constrained. Interestingly, at the inception of legal abortion, advocates promised protection for conscientious objection. But today, this right is steadily eroded or even reversed. Objecting medical professionals and institutions today are instead regularly sued by groups demanding that they perform abortions. Pro-life doctors and nurses are denied positions or even licenses to practice, despite their superior commitment to the fundamental medical ethic, always to heal and never to kill. The pressure on medical conscientious protection persists despite the really interesting fact that from the very beginning of legal abortion, the vast majority of medical professionals declined to perform it, something which continues today. And because of this attack upon conscientious objection, persons who would otherwise count as among the most sensitive to the extraordinary value of human life per se, simply because it is human, are driven away from the practice of medicine, driven in particular away from caring for women and children. Also, medicine in many countries has become generally less sensitive to the dignity and value of human life at every stage. In conclusion, then, predictably, the movement to legalize abortion has ended up undermining human freedom and happiness. It relies upon a vision of human persons as strictly self-made, with the power over life and death of other people. But societies today need rather to affirm, as every speaker here has said, that every human being is made for relationship, for interdependence, for solidarity within a communion. The logic of abortion is a profound mistake at a time in history when we are struggling to see one another as sisters and brothers in every context. But at the same time, there is hope. There is hope because the movement for life is growing stronger in the coming generation. In the words of Hans Jonas, one of the parents of the modern environmentalist movement, ordinarily only present interests make themselves heard and felt. The future is not represented. It is not a force that throws its weight into the scales. The non-existent has no lobby, and the unborn are powerless. He wrote this many decades ago. Yet, the movement to respect the lives of both mothers and their unborn children is growing for over a half a century, despite opposition from all the powers that be. And this is a sign of great hope for this human rights cause. Thank you very much.